In the fall of 1963, a woman in Dayton, Ohio, spent 4 hours in her kitchen making food that would last 45 minutes on a card table. A cheese ball rolled in pecans sat in the center. Deviled eggs circled a glass plate. Everything on that table came out of her own oven and her own 2 hands, and every neighbor who walked through the front door expected exactly that. 19 on the countdown spent 2 weeks soaking in vinegar before anyone brought it to a party, and half the table refused to touch it. And the snack at 14 disappeared from the buffet before the hostess poured her second drink. Nobody called it entertaining. They called it having people over. A kitchen, a card table, and enough food to prove you cared. Here are 30 forgotten homemade party snacks from the 1960s no one brings anymore. Number 30. Cheese ball rolled in pecans. 2 blocks of cream cheese, a packet of dried onion soup mix, a cup of shredded cheddar, and a handful of chopped pecans pressed into the outside. The whole thing went into the refrigerator for at least 2 hours so it held its shape on the plate. You set it on the table with a box of Ritz crackers and a butter knife, and it sat there all evening getting softer as the room warmed up. The pecans stayed crunchy. The cheese pulled apart in thick strings when someone dragged a cracker through it. Every party in every suburb in this country had a cheese ball on the table from about 1958 through the mid-1970s. The recipe came from the back of the cream cheese box, and nobody pretended otherwise. Number 29. Deviled eggs. Hard-boiled eggs cut in half, the yolks mashed with mayonnaise, mustard, and a pinch of salt, then spooned back into the white. A shake of paprika on top for color. That was every deviled egg in every kitchen across the decade. The plate went to the table arranged in a circle, and the eggs vanished from the outside in. Some women added a drop of pickle relish, others stirred in a spoonful of horseradish, but the base recipe never changed because the base recipe never needed to. Deviled eggs were the first thing eaten and the first plate emptied at every bridge club, every backyard gathering, every covered dish supper where someone carried a plate across the street. The woman who made the best ones in the neighborhood held that title for years. Before I go any further, for the folks who want more of these old recipes gathered in one place, I put together the Vintage Recipe Guide. It is a collection of recipes like these, all in one book. You can find it on my website, vintagelifestyleusa.com. I will not bring it up again. If you want it, it is there. Now back to the list. Number 28. Homemade Chex Party Mix. Wheat Chex, rice Chex, pretzel sticks, mixed nuts, and a generous pour of Worcestershire sauce stirred together with melted butter and garlic salt, spread on a sheet pan, and baked low and slow for about an hour. The oven filled the house with a smell that was equal parts savory and salty and impossible to walk past. You stirred it every 15 minutes so nothing burned. The finished mix went into a large bowl on the coffee table, and by the end of the evening the bowl was empty and the cushions were full of crumbs. The recipe printed on the side of the Chex box, and within a few years the company sold it pre-made in a bag. The homemade version was always better. Number 27. Stuffed celery with cream cheese and olives, stalks of celery cut into 3-inch pieces, the groove filled with cream cheese mixed with chopped green olives and a dash of Worcestershire. The celery was cold and crisp, the filling was smooth and salty from the olives. You picked one up like a canoe and bit off one end, and the filling squeezed out the other side. Some women used pimento cheese instead, but the olive and cream cheese version was the one that showed up on party trays, arranged in rows like green boats on a white plate. Nobody at that table thought of celery as health food. They thought of it as something to hold the filling. Number 26. Cocktail meatballs in grape jelly. Ground beef rolled into balls the size of a walnut, browned in a skillet, then simmered in a sauce made from 1 jar of grape jelly and 1 bottle of chili sauce stirred together over low heat. The combination sounds wrong. The sweetness of the grape jelly cut the heat of the chili sauce, and the meatballs absorbed both until the outside was glazed and sticky. They sat in a chafing dish on the buffet with a box of toothpicks beside them, and guests ate 15 or 20 without noticing. The toothpick pile next to the dish was the only way to count how many had disappeared. Number 25. Onion dip. 1 packet of Lipton onion soup mix stirred into a pint of sour cream. That was the entire recipe. It took 30 seconds, cost almost nothing, and tasted better than anything that simple had a right to taste. The sour cream turned the dried onion flakes soft and savory, and the flavor deepened the longer it sat in the refrigerator. The dip went into a bowl surrounded by ruffled potato chips, and the chips broke under the weight about half the time. You fished the broken half out of the bowl with your fingers when nobody was looking. Lipton printed the recipe on the soup mix box in the late 1950s, and within 5 years it became the most replicated dip in the country. Number 24. Pigs in a blanket. Cocktail wieners wrapped in triangles of crescent roll dough and baked until the pastry puffed up golden and the little sausage inside turned hot enough to burn the roof of your mouth. You pulled them apart and dipped them in yellow mustard. The dough was soft and buttery. The wiener was salty and snapped when you bit through the casing. Children ate them by the handful. Adults ate them standing next to the oven before the tray made it to the table. A tube of Pillsbury crescent rolls and a package of cocktail franks produced about 2 dozen, and 2 dozen was never enough for a room with more than 4 people. Number 23. Cheese straws. Sharp cheddar grated into a dough with flour, butter, and a pinch of cayenne, pressed through a cookie press or rolled flat and cut into thin strips, then baked until they cracked when you bent them. The straws were fragile and broke into pieces on the serving plate, and nobody cared because the pieces tasted the same. Southern hostesses made them by the tin and stored them in round metal containers lined with wax paper. A good cheese straw had enough cayenne to warm the back of your tongue, and enough butter to make you reach for another before you finish the first. Number 22. Rumaki. A chicken liver and a slice of water chestnut wrapped together in a strip of bacon, secured with a toothpick and broiled until the bacon crisped. The combination came from tiki culture and Polynesian-themed restaurants that swept through the suburbs during the late 1950s. Trader Vic's put rumaki on the menu, and within a few years it appeared at cocktail parties in living rooms across the country. The bacon made it acceptable. The water chestnut gave it crunch. The liver was the part most guests did not think about until after they had already eaten 3. Rumaki divided a room. Half the guests loved it. The other half stayed near the cheese ball. Number 21. Ham salad on Ritz crackers. Leftover baked ham ground through a hand-cranked meat grinder, mixed with mayonnaise, sweet pickle relish, and a teaspoon of yellow mustard. The spread was thick and pink and salty, and you scooped it onto a Ritz cracker with a butter knife and ate it in 2 bites. The meat grinder clamped to the edge of the counter and turned the ham into a paste that held together without sliding off. Some women added a chopped hard-boiled egg. Others left the relish out entirely. The recipe depended on how much ham was left over from Sunday, and the answer was usually enough for a platter of crackers and not much more. The house party of the early 1960s ran on 2 things: a kitchen that never stopped producing, and a living room that pretended the food appeared by itself. The woman who hosted spent more time cooking than talking. She answered the door with a dish towel over her shoulder and a timer running on the stove. The guests arrived with a bottle of something and left with nothing but a full stomach and the quiet understanding that someone had worked all day to make the evening feel effortless. Nobody photographed the food. Nobody asked for the recipe until the next morning, over the telephone, from memory. The party happened and then it was over, and the only record was a counter full of empty plates and a sink full of toothpicks. Number 20. Ribbon sandwiches. 3 slices of bread layered with 2 different fillings, pressed together, wrapped in wax paper, and chilled until firm. Then sliced crosswise into thin strips that showed the layers like a striped ribbon. One layer might be cream cheese with chopped olives. The other might be egg salad or ham spread. The visual effect was the point. Ribbon sandwiches took more time than anything else on the table, and the women who made them knew it. They appeared at bridal showers, bridge afternoons, and any gathering where presentation mattered more than portion size. A platter of ribbon sandwiches told every guest the hostess had time to spare, or at least wanted it to look that way. Number 19. Pickled eggs. Hard-boiled eggs dropped into a jar of white vinegar, beet juice, sugar, and pickling spice, then sealed and stored in the refrigerator for at least 2 weeks. The eggs turned deep purple from the beet juice. The whites went rubbery and tangy from the vinegar. Cutting one in half revealed a ring of violet around the white and a firm yellow yolk in the center, and the sight alone made half the people at the table lean in and the other half lean back. Pickled eggs sat on party tables in the Midwest and the Upper South the way shrimp cocktail sat on tables in the Northeast. They were old-world food brought over by German and Polish families who pickled everything because pickling was how you kept eggs when there was no room in the icebox. A dozen eggs, a quart of vinegar, and 2 weeks of patience produced a snack that lasted for a month and got better with time. The flavor was sharp and sour and faintly sweet. The texture was firm enough to slice cleanly. The smell cleared a room if you opened the jar too fast. Men ate them at hunting camps and taverns. Women served them on cut glass plates at home and pretended they were elegant. The truth fell somewhere in the middle. The recipe varied by region. In the Midwest, white vinegar and sugar. In Pennsylvania, red beet juice and cloves. In parts of the South, jalapeno slices for heat. Each version looked different and tasted different, but the process was identical: eggs, vinegar, thyme. The jar itself became a conversation piece. Guests who had never tried a pickled egg ate one because someone dared them to, and half of those guests asked for the recipe before the night ended. Number 18. Olive and cream cheese pinwheels. A block of cream cheese softened and spread across thin slices of white bread with the crusts removed. Sliced green olives pressed into the surface. The whole thing rolled tight into a log, wrapped in wax paper, and chilled until it held its shape. Then sliced into half-inch rounds that showed a spiral of white cheese dotted with green. Each pinwheel was eaten in a single bite. The flavor was mild, salty from the olives, creamy from the cheese. The effort was disproportionate to the size of each piece. Spreading, rolling, chilling, slicing. All of that for something that lasted 10 seconds in a guest's hand. Number 17. Clam dip. 1 can of minced clams, drained, stirred into softened cream cheese with a splash of lemon juice, a dash of Worcestershire, and a pinch of garlic powder. The dip was thick and slightly gray and tasted like the coast had been invited to a cocktail party in Ohio. You served it cold with potato chips or Triscuits, and the first scoop was always the best because the surface was still smooth. By the end of the night, the bowl looked excavated, with broken chip pieces standing up from the surface. Clam dip was sophisticated for 1962. It meant someone in the kitchen had opened a can that was not soup. Number 16. Bologna and cream cheese roll-ups. A slice of bologna, a layer of cream cheese spread from edge to edge, and the whole thing rolled into a tight cylinder and sliced into rounds. Some women added a strip of dill pickle in the center so the cross-section showed a green dot inside a pink spiral. The rolls were held together with toothpicks and arranged on a platter in circles. Children ate them as fast as they appeared. The bologna was salty. The cream cheese was smooth. The pickle added crunch and acid. 3 ingredients, no cooking, no heat, and no cleanup beyond a butter knife and a cutting board. The women who made these snacks did not follow recipes the way a later generation would. They did not open a cookbook or search for instructions. They watched. Their mothers made these trays. Their aunts carried them to family reunions. Their neighbors brought them across the street on a covered plate. The knowledge moved through kitchens like weather, arriving without announcement, settling without explanation. A woman learned deviled eggs by standing beside the woman already making them. She learned the mayonnaise to mustard ratio by taste, not by tablespoon. And when her turn came to host, she stood at the same counter and made the same food her mother made, because that was how a party worked. Nobody questioned it. Nobody improved it. They just made it. Number 15. Swedish meatballs. Ground beef and ground pork mixed with breadcrumbs soaked in milk, a grated onion, and an egg. Rolled small, browned in butter, and simmered in a gravy made from the drippings, cream, and a spoonful of flour. The meatballs were tender, and the gravy was rich enough to eat with a spoon. They sat in a chafing dish at the center of the table, and the steam rising off the lid made the whole room smell like a kitchen that had been working since noon. Swedish meatballs were the only appetizer on most tables that could pass as dinner. The gravy was the real draw. The meatballs were the excuse to eat it. Number 14. Stuffed mushrooms. White button mushrooms, stems twisted out and chopped fine, mixed with breadcrumbs, garlic, Parmesan cheese, and a splash of olive oil, stuffed back into the caps, and baked until the tops turned golden and the mushrooms softened into earthy pockets of filling. The first stuffed mushroom that arrived at a suburban party in the early 1960s was an event. Mushrooms were not common on American tables before that decade. Most people knew them only as canned, sliced into rubbery gray coins, a topping for steak, or an ingredient in cream of mushroom soup. The idea of eating a whole mushroom stuffed with garlic and cheese and served as finger food felt foreign and sophisticated, and exactly like the kind of thing a hostess served when she wanted to signal that her kitchen had moved beyond the casserole. Fresh mushrooms meant a trip to a proper market. They came in brown paper bags, and you washed them one at a time and trimmed the stems with a paring knife. Every mushroom was a separate project. Twist, chop, mix, fill, place on the sheet. Repeat 25 times. The reward was a platter of something that tasted like nothing else at the party. Warm and soft, crunchy filling, a thin Parmesan crust on top that cracked when you bit into it. They vanished from the tray in minutes, and the woman who made them spent the rest of the evening answering the same question. How did you make those mushrooms? She usually said breadcrumbs, garlic, cheese. She made it sound simple because the recipe was simple. The work was the part she never mentioned. Number 13. Sardine canapés. A tin of sardines drained, mashed with a fork, mixed with a squeeze of lemon and a spoonful of cream cheese, spread on rounds of Melba toast, and topped with a thin slice of onion. The sardines were salty and oily and tasted like exactly what they were. Some guests loved them. Some avoided the tray entirely after one look. Sardine canapés appeared at cocktail parties hosted by people who had traveled or who wanted to look like they had. The Melba toast cracked in half with every bite, and the sardine filling landed on the front of your shirt more often than it stayed on the cracker. The tin sat on the counter with the lid peeled back, and the smell alone announced what was on the menu before anyone reached the table. Number 12. Sausage balls. A pound of bulk pork sausage, 2 cups of biscuit, and a cup of shredded sharp cheddar mixed in a bowl with your hands until the dough held shape. Rolled into balls the size of a walnut and baked until the outsides browned and the centers cooked through. They came out firm and savory, with a slight crumble from the biscuit and a pull of melted cheese in every bite. The recipe spread through church circles and junior league cookbooks during the early 1960s and never left. Every woman who made them claimed the recipe as her own. The list of ingredients was on the side of the biscuit box the whole time. Number 11. Cheese fondue. Swiss and Gruyere melted together with white wine and a splash of kirsch, kept warm over a small flame, served with cubes of crusty bread on long forks for dipping. Fondue sets arrived in American kitchens as wedding gifts starting in the late 1950s, and by the mid-1960s, the pot appeared at nearly every dinner party that wanted to feel continental. Guests stood around the pot, dipped their bread, and lost it in the cheese about a third of the time. The tradition said whoever dropped their bread owed the table a kiss or a round of drinks. The cheese thickened as the evening went on. The bread cubes shrank, and the fondue fork went home with someone who forgot it was not theirs. By the early 1970s, the fondue pot had moved from the dining table to the top shelf of the closet, where it sat next to the electric knife and the chip and dip set. Every snack on this list required one thing the grocery store could not sell: the decision to open your home. A block of cream cheese and a can of clams cost less than $1. The woman who turned them into something worth eating and set them on a table for 20 people she had invited by telephone spent the currency that mattered, which was her time and her kitchen, and the quiet assumption that people coming through her door deserved something made by hand. That assumption faded when the first plastic tray of pre-made appetizers appeared at the deli counter. The party did not end because the food got worse. The party ended because the effort stopped feeling necessary. Number 10. Shrimp cocktail. Boiled shrimp, chilled, arranged around the rim of a glass bowl filled with cocktail sauce made from ketchup, horseradish, and a squeeze of lemon. The shrimp hung over the edge by their tails, and guests pulled them off one at a time, dunked them, and ate them in 2 bites. Shrimp cocktail was the most expensive thing on the table, and the first one finished. The sauce had to be sharp enough to clear your sinuses. A bowl of shrimp at a house party in 1964 meant the hosts were celebrating something or trying to impress someone, and either way, the shrimp was gone in 15 minutes. Number 9. Cucumber sandwiches. White bread with the crusts removed, spread with butter, topped with paper-thin slices of cucumber, and cut into triangles no bigger than 2 fingers. The sandwiches were cold, mild, and delicate. They showed up at bridal showers and ladies' luncheons where presentation mattered more than flavor. The cucumber was crisp, the butter was cool, the bread went soft within an hour, which meant timing mattered more than seasoning. You made them at the last possible minute and arranged them on a silver tray with a damp paper towel over the top until the guests arrived. A platter of cucumber sandwiches told every woman in the room that the hostess had read the right magazine and had the patience to cut 40 triangles in a single afternoon. Number 8. Chipped beef dip. A jar of dried chipped beef, chopped fine and stirred into softened cream cheese with sour cream, horseradish, and minced onion, spooned into a baking dish and heated until it bubbled around the edges. Served hot with crackers or squares of pumpernickel. Chipped beef had been a military staple for decades before it ended up on a party table. Soldiers knew it as the main ingredient in creamed chipped beef on toast, a mess hall dish with a nickname too rough for polite company. The fact that something born in an army cafeteria ended up on a hostess's buffet says everything about how American food traveled in the post-war years. A soldier came home, his wife tasted what he described, and she found a way to dress it up by changing the vehicle from toast to dip, and the setting from a metal tray to a chafing dish. The dip was rich, salty, and faintly smoky. The horseradish cut the heaviness. The cream cheese made the texture smooth enough to hold on a cracker. A hot, chipped beef dip smelled like a kitchen that had been working, even though the whole thing took 10 minutes to assemble and 15 to bake. Women who served it were practical cooks. They knew the recipe used 4 ingredients, cost almost nothing, and fed a crowd. The jar of dried beef sat on the shelf next to the canned tuna, and it waited there until someone picked up the telephone and said, "Come over Saturday." The dip tasted best in the first 20 minutes, when the edges were still bubbling and the center was hot enough to soften the cracker if you held it there. After that, it cooled into a firm mass that was still worth eating but no longer the reason anyone walked back to the table. Number 7. Pimento cheese. Sharp cheddar grated by hand, mixed with mayonnaise, a jar of diced pimentos, and a crack of black pepper. The spread was orange and lumpy and tasted like 1,000 backyard cookouts pressed into a single scoop. You put it on crackers, stuffed it into celery, spread it on bread, or ate it from the bowl with a spoon when nobody was looking. Pimento cheese was Southern in origin and universal in practice by the mid-1960s. It traveled in Tupperware to block parties, holiday gatherings, and neighborhood cookouts. Every woman's version tasted different, and every woman was certain hers was the right one. Number 6. Homemade cheese puffs. Water, butter, and a pinch of salt brought to a boil. Flour stirred in fast until the dough pulled from the sides of the pan. Eggs beaten in one at a time. Grated Swiss folded through. Spooned onto a baking sheet and baked until they puffed into golden balls, crispy outside and hollow in the center. The French called them gougères. American women in the 1960s called them cheese puffs and set them on the same table as the onion dip. They were warm, light, and gone in 2 bites. Making them took more technique than anything else at the party, and the women who pulled it off carried a reputation that lasted longer than the puffs themselves. Number 5. Spiced pecans. pecan halves tossed in melted butter, Worcestershire sauce, and a shake of cayenne, spread on a sheet pan and roasted until the kitchen smelled like a smokehouse. The pecans came out dark and glistening and hot enough to burn your fingertips if you reached too soon. They sat in a glass bowl on the coffee table and shrank steadily through the evening without anyone admitting responsibility. A pound of pecans cost more than most things on the party table, but guests took them one or two at a time, and the small bowl made it feel polite. The spice stayed on your fingers for the rest of the night, and you could always tell who had been reaching into the bowl by the faint orange stain on their thumb and forefinger. Number 4. Hot crab dip. Canned crab meat, picked through for shells, mixed with cream cheese, sour cream, lemon juice, and Old Bay seasoning, baked in a small dish until the top browned and the edges bubbled. Served with toast points or Triscuits. The dip was rich, warm, and tasted expensive even when the crab came from a can. Coastal families used fresh crab. Inland families used whatever the grocery store stocked. Both versions ended up on the same kind of table at the same kind of party. The dish emptied fast and refilled slowly because nobody wanted to ask the hostess to make another batch. One was always enough. Wanting more was the compliment. Number 3. Tomato aspic. Tomato juice heated with gelatin, a splash of vinegar, celery salt, and a bay leaf poured into a mold and refrigerated until it set into a firm, quivering slab of savory jelly. Turned out onto a plate, it held the shape of whatever mold was used, sometimes a ring, sometimes a dome, sitting on the buffet looking like something between a salad and a science experiment. The flavor was tangy, cold, and tasted like tomato soup that had gone solid. Guests either helped themselves to a polite square or avoided it entirely. Aspic was the hostess's way of showing she owned the right molds and read the right magazines. By the 1970s, the molds moved to the back of the cabinet. Number 2. Ambrosia. Canned mandarin oranges, canned pineapple chunks, miniature marshmallows, shredded coconut, and a generous pour of sour cream stirred together and chilled overnight. The marshmallows softened. The coconut absorbed the juice. The sour cream kept it from tasting like pure sugar, though it came close. Ambrosia showed up at every holiday gathering, every potluck, and every party where dessert was expected but baking was not. It required no oven, no stove, and no skill beyond opening a can. Children ate it like candy. Adults ate it like a side dish and pretended the sour cream made it respectable. The bowl was always too big and always came home empty. Number 1. The relish tray. A long glass dish divided into sections, each one filled by hand. Celery sticks, carrot curls, green olives, black olives, sweet gherkins, radish roses, and a few slices of pepperoncini for color. The relish tray sat at the center of every table before any guest arrived. Nothing on it was cooked. Nothing required a recipe. The work was in the choosing and the cutting and the arranging, and the woman who did it treated the tray the way a painter treats a canvas, because the relish tray told every person walking through the door that someone had been thinking about this evening since morning. The food on this list did not cost much money. It cost attention. A kitchen, a set of hands, and the belief that people coming into your home deserved something you made yourself. That belief filled a relish tray the same way it filled a cheese ball and a plate of deviled eggs. Nobody writes it on a recipe card, but it was the ingredient on every single table. Boardwalk fries are actually another platter-filling item that was the primary cause for people's metabolism skyrocketing back in the 70s. Boardwalk fries were not typically cooked like just any old basket of fries. These were dipped in vinegar and cold water before being fried twice in the fryer, resulting in what was an extremely soft yet very crispy fry people would always get with their burger. Number 18. Peanut butter on saltines. A jar of peanut butter, a sleeve of saltines, a knife, or the back of a spoon. In 1965, a jar of Skippy peanut butter cost 79 cents. A box of saltines cost 23 cents. Together, they provided a week's worth of after-school snacks for under $1, which made them the reliable default in households from rural Ohio to the farms of western Kansas. The cracker had to be firm enough to hold the peanut butter without snapping, and if 3 saltines were stacked, they could be carried in one hand without losing any. If you grew up eating these, you probably still make them today without ever thinking to call it anything but a snack. No plate needed, no preparation beyond opening 2 packages, a box of crackers on the table, and a jar of peanut butter beside it. That was your whole afternoon after school. You have heard of caramel popcorn with regular salted popcorn, but Chicago Mix popcorn, which you can find anywhere in Illinois, takes it up a notch. Cheddar cheese and caramel popcorn mixed together made for some loud theaters because people could not stop munching. Maybe just a bit too savory, those kinds of flavors did do well in the 1970s. Cottage cheese with canned peaches was the after-school snack that arrived with the 1970s fitness wave and stayed through the 80s without ever becoming fashionable, which is how most genuinely useful things work. You spooned large curd cottage cheese into a bowl, always large curd, never small, then opened the Del Monte or Dole can of sliced peaches in heavy syrup and laid them over the top without draining. The syrup ran into the curds and pooled at the bottom of the bowl. Cottage cheese had been marketed as diet food since the early 1970s, when the first serious American fitness movement made its push into everyday life, and the peach pairing was that era's answer to dessert for the disciplined. It tasted better than it sounded. But the woman who kept both a carton of cottage cheese and a row of Del Monte cans simultaneously ready, always both, always waiting, is the part that's gone. Donuts and America are such a classic pairing that it is a no-brainer why Louisiana loves its beignets. Deep-fried donuts that would be caked in cinnamon or other lovely toppings, it was the donut of every sweet lover's eye. Also, maybe the bane of doctors who were sick of dealing with metabolism issues. Kids definitely were very pro-beignets and would devour these up anytime they found them. Number 20. Lard and sugar bread. An open-faced slice of white bread spread with rendered lard and sprinkled with sugar. If you grew up in farm communities across Iowa, Illinois, and the hill country of Arkansas, this was the dessert that appeared when there was no dessert. The lard was always in the house because families kept their own hogs or bought it in 5-pound cans. Sugar cost about 8 cents a pound in 1965. Spread thin on lard-coated bread, a teaspoon of sugar went far and tasted richer than it had any right to. The lard kept the sugar from sliding off and melted slightly against the warmth of a hand. Historian Richard Willis recalled eating these on a Depression-era farm in Iowa, but the tradition carried well into the 1960s in households where the lard bucket never left the stovetop. Bread, fat, sugar. Your mother and grandmother both knew that was enough to get a child from 3 in the afternoon to supper time without complaint. You might be able to sue crab chips for false advertising, because on one hand they do taste delicious, but on the other they do not have any crab in them. Maryland Old Bay seasoning, which is commonly associated with crab dishes, is what these potato chips are covered in. Whatever it is, it works, and it works too good, because these things were mouth-watering, crunchy, and just the right amount of tangy. Chocolate milk made with Hershey's syrup was never just chocolate milk. It was a ratio, and everyone who grew up making it had their own and was willing to argue about it. You tilted the squeeze bottle, counted to a number, and stirred until the dark pool at the bottom lifted. Stop too soon, and you'd drink thin milk, then hit pure sweetness at the end. Hershey's syrup had been sold in tin cans since 1926, but in 1979 the company switched to the plastic squeeze bottle, the only version every 80s kid knew. The school cafeteria's chocolate milk was too uniform. The kind you made at home had variation, and you learned to correct for it pour by pour. Most kitchens don't keep a squeeze bottle anymore. The muscle memory for the count has gone quiet. Marshmallow fluff and sweet milk chocolate made moon pies a snack that people in Alabama just could not let go. Some people would spice theirs up with graham crackers, and the dark chocolate sauce was simply to die for. School kids, particularly teenagers, would always have a couple of packs of moon pies as they were bus ride comfort food. Number 21. Cornbread crumbled in buttermilk. In the hills of eastern Kentucky and the river bottoms of western North Carolina, this was called crumble in, or just something to tide you over. A wedge of leftover cornbread, cold or still warm from the cast iron skillet, crumbled into a tall drinking glass with cold buttermilk poured over the top. You ate it with a spoon. The buttermilk was sour and thin and turned the cornbread into something almost pudding-like after 2 minutes. Some families used whole milk instead, which they called sweet milk in those mountains. In 30 years of collecting oral histories from Appalachian families, food writer Ronnie Lundy found that not one person with mountain roots failed to mention this tradition. It was that universal. A box of cornmeal cost a dime in 1963. Buttermilk was free if a family kept a cow, and most farm families did. This was the evening snack for generations across those mountains, and the people who grew up eating it will tell you it remains one of the best things they have ever tasted. The pie itself did so well in family celebrations and bakeries that people came up with key lime pie bites, which were just bite-sized variants of the delicious dessert. Amazing as appetizers and amazing as snacks for sweet tooths, people would forget their civil sides around a fresh plate of these. Frozen orange juice popsicles made in ice cube trays with toothpicks came out of the post-war American kitchen, where the chest freezer was new and the idea of making your own frozen treats was still a genuine discovery. You poured diluted Minute Maid concentrate into each slot, 1 can concentrate, 3 cans water, pressed a flat toothpick into the center, and carried the tray level to the freezer. The trick was the toothpick standing straight before the juice started setting. Minute Maid had introduced frozen concentrated orange juice commercially in 1946, a technology developed during World War II to ship juice to troops overseas without spoilage, and by the 1980s it sat in nearly every American freezer. Otter Pops and Fudgsicles were the commercial replacement, cheaper, already frozen, but they tasted like approximations. The toothpick version tasted like what you'd poured into a glass that morning. The real thing, just colder. Stepping away from the fryer and looking more into the drier side of food, trail mixes were a Californian favorite, and they were just a mix of different dry fruits. Almonds, raisins, dates, and pecan or pumpkin seeds you could customize to your heart's desire. Easy to see why something with so much potential for personalization became so popular in a decade all about experimentation. Number 13. Cracklin' Bread Bites. In November, when the hog was killed, the pieces of pork fat and skin that went into the hot cast iron pot turned crisp and brown as the fat cooked out. Those were the cracklins, and a smart cook didn't throw them away. She folded them into cornbread batter, baked a cracklin bread in the skillet, and when it cooled, broke it into pieces for children to carry off in their hands. In the Piedmont counties of North Carolina and the river counties of Mississippi, cracklin bread was the fall snack, the one that appeared after hog killing time and tasted like nothing else all year. The cracklins gave the cornbread a rich, chewy texture all the way through, and the rendered fat made it denser than ordinary cornbread. One piece filled a hand and a stomach both. Nothing from that hog was wasted. Not the head, not the feet, not the fat. The rendering of lard and the making of cracklins were community events in farming households across the South. Neighbors came, women worked together for an entire day. Your parents and grandparents stood at the edges of the yard and waited for the first piece of hot cracklin bread to come out of the skillet. It was one of the few moments in the year when the most ordinary ingredient turned into something people gathered around. Here is what doesn't get said often enough. The snacks that no company could ever package are the ones tied to the season. Cracklin bread required paying attention to November, the hog, the cold, the year winding down. A bag of chips is available every month and tastes identical in March and October. Cracklin bread tasted like the specific cold morning it was made on, in a specific kitchen, by a specific grandmother. That connection between food and time and place is something no manufacturer has ever figured out how to put in a wrapper and sell. The women who made this knew something about food that no recipe will ever teach. Saltine crackers with butter and sugar required nothing more than an open pantry and 3 minutes, which is why every American kid made it when no adult was home. You pulled crackers from the inner wax paper sleeve, spread each one with butter from the counter dish, never a cold stick because cold butter tore the cracker, then shook white sugar over and pressed it lightly so it stuck. The saltine dates to 1876, when the F.L. Summer Company of St. Joseph, Missouri, produced the first commercial salted cracker. In the 1980s, before snack aisles expanded into entire wings of grocery stores, this was what kids reached for when the kitchen offered nothing better. It cost almost nothing. It vanished not because anyone decided to stop, just because the pantry stopped having all three things ready at once. Idaho likes to keep it simple, like Hawaii, which is pretty respectable because for them, just potato skins with bacon and cream was the real American dream. Nothing more, nothing less. These light and appetizing potato skins were so popular in the 70s that kids ate almost nothing else. Number 16. Raw potato slices with salt. A potato pulled from the root cellar, rinsed, sliced thin with a paring knife, laid out on a plate, and salted. If you grew up in farm communities across the Plain States, Nebraska, Kansas, Missouri, raw potato slices were the simple, free snack that appeared when everything else was put away and supper was still 2 hours out. Children ate them standing at the kitchen counter. The potato tasted starchy and faintly sweet when truly fresh. The salt brought out something that tasted almost buttery. No cooking, no heating, no waiting. A 10-year-old could make this in under 3 minutes. Potatoes kept in the root cellar from October through February, the most reliable thing in a house where other items ran out. A 10-pound bag of potatoes cost 49 cents in 1963. That is a month's worth of afternoon snacks for almost nothing. Nobody wrote this down as a recipe, and if your grandmother made it, she didn't need to. Ants on a log sounds like something a camp counselor invented on a dare, but from the 1950s onward, it was the snack that taught American kids that cooking could mean assembly, not heat. You split a celery stalk, dragged a butter knife heavy with peanut butter through the groove until full, and lined the raisins up one by one, never dumping them, always placing, because the spacing was the whole point. The Oxford Companion to American Food and Drink traces the name to a Minneapolis Star-Tribune article from February of 1959, where a family described it as something children had started making themselves. The Girl Scouts had a version in their cookbooks as far back as 1946, though they just called it celery sticks. What the name added was theater. By the 1980s, it had moved from summer camp to every kitchen in America, every kid making it the same way. Deliberate raisin placement, as if rules existed. They did. Nobody wrote them down. Who can ever say no to corn, especially roasted corn kernel? Corn nuts would be very popular whenever it was harvest time in Iowa, and for kids these would be a great snack to make the school bus easier. Available in street stalls around the corners or in packets and cans, they proved that Iowa is one state very serious about its corn. Number 19. Fried biscuit donuts. In the coal mining communities of southwestern Virginia and the hollows of West Virginia, when a grandmother made biscuits, she sometimes fried a few extras. She pinched off rounds of biscuit dough and dropped them into hot lard in a cast iron pot until they puffed and turned golden. Then she shook them in a paper bag with powdered sugar or cinnamon sugar. They came out hot, dense, faintly sweet, with an outside that crackled and an inside that steamed when pulled apart. These weren't donuts the way anyone would buy in a shop. They had no holes, no glaze, no frosting. They were something better, warm, homemade, nearly free. And if you ever pulled one apart while it was still hot, you know exactly what that steam smelled like. And they smelled up the whole house when that cast iron pot got hot. Miners' wives had been making these since at least the early 1900s, and by the time the 1960s arrived, the recipe was still being passed down without ever being written. No cookbook taught it. A daughter learned it standing at the stove. A woman in Buchanan County, Virginia, described the recipe to Foxfire Field researchers in 1975 as simply, heat the grease, drop the dough, roll in sugar. That was the entire instruction. The lard she fried them in was left over from breakfast. The dough was whatever remained after the biscuits were cut. Nothing measured, nothing wasted. There is something worth understanding about food from coal country. It is not sentimental about itself. It did not need to be. The families who ate these fried biscuit donuts weren't romanticizing hard times. They were just finding a way to make something good out of what was in the kitchen on a light pay afternoon. The women who made these didn't call themselves resourceful. They called themselves mothers. And the children who grew up eating them, the people who are your grandparents now, those generations who are grandparents themselves now, remembered the taste for the rest of their lives. Salmon is such a widely caught fish in Alaska that salmon beef jerky should barely come as a surprise. Eggs, salmon beef jerky with a side of toast, was a cheap and common breakfast in diners and pubs in the state in the 70s. People would often have slices of beef jerky and use it in other dishes too, like casseroles or meatloafs. Number 22. Saltine crackers and milk. A handful of saltines broken into a bowl, warm milk poured over the top, a pinch of sugar if the mother was feeling generous. The crackers soaked up the milk and turned soft enough to eat with a spoon. If you grew up in mill-town households across New England and rural Pennsylvania, a variation on bread and milk for families who kept saltines in the house and sometimes ran short of bread. In the 1960s, a box of saltines cost about 23 cents. A quart of milk was 25 cents. That is an afternoon snack for a family of 4 for under 50 cents. Children in the textile towns of the Piedmont called it stewed crackers. Some families added a little butter while the milk was still warm. The crackers dissolved at the edges first, leaving a thick paste at the bottom of the bowl that tasted better than it had any right to. No stove required, no pots to wash. Those were the two best qualities a snack could have. Before instant pudding packets made it a 5-minute job, stovetop vanilla pudding was something you watched someone make from scratch. Milk, sugar, cornstarch, a wooden spoon that never stopped circling the bottom of the pot. You stood at the stove because you were allowed to lick the spoon when it was almost done, and because watching the pudding thicken, going from thin and liquid to thick and glossy, was a kind of slow kitchen magic. By the 1980s, Jell-O instant mixes had taken over most households, but in some kitchens the pudding still came off the stove warm. You ate it straight from the pot before it reached a bowl. Hot vanilla pudding has a depth that the cold, set version loses entirely. The woman who made it that way understood that. She is gone now, and the pot sits unused in a cabinet somewhere. From a state that loves barbecue pork ribs, has its own Kansas-style barbecue, it is no surprise that Kansas adores barbecue corn chips. Essentially just corn-flavored chips that have a gracious amount of barbecue seasoning sprinkled onto them. These were the definition of munchies. 1970. Kansas saw such a spike in popularity for these that store shelves would often be empty. Number 23. Peanuts in a Coke bottle. Take a glass bottle of Coca-Cola. Drink a few sips from the neck to make room. Tear open a sleeve of salted peanuts and pour them straight in. Then tilt the bottle at 40 degrees and drink. That is a farmer's Coke. And the tradition goes back to at least the 1920s when packaged peanuts first started appearing beside the soda cooler at Southern General Stores. Workers in the fields of Georgia and Alabama poured their peanuts in because they had dirty hands and no time to stop and eat separately. A snack and a drink became one thing: sweet, salty, fizzy, crunchy. The peanuts stayed crisp in the Coke, and each sip brought one or two along. By the 1960s, this tradition had moved from the fields to the front porch to the baseball game. If you grew up in the South, you learned it by watching a parent. Not one advertisement was ever made for it. Some things are passed down because your family passed them to you, and that is enough. Number 10. Apple slices with salt. A late summer and fall tradition in farm communities from the Ozarks to the Blue Ridge. An apple from the yard or the cellar, peeled, sliced thin, laid on a plate with a small dish of salt on the side. Each slice got dipped, and the salt drew out the apple's juice and sharpened its sweetness in a way that tasted almost savory. In the Piedmont communities of western North Carolina, families sat on the porch in September and passed around salted apple slices while the afternoon cooled. This was the simple, free thing between the end of the workday and the start of supper. The apples cost nothing if a family had a tree, and most rural families did. A dish of salt cost nothing extra. No stove, no pot, no preparation beyond a knife and a steady hand. That was the whole snack, and if you try it today, it still works. Cold leftover biscuits had their own logic in a Southern kitchen. Breakfast biscuits were for the morning, but day-old biscuits were denser and slightly dried at the crust, better suited to cold butter and preserved fruit that made them an afternoon snack. You split them with your thumbs, never a knife. Cold butter went into the crumb and softened in seconds. Then a heavy spoon of fig or strawberry preserves from a mason jar put up in August. Across the South and into Appalachia, biscuit making was the skill that separated a real cook from someone who could just follow directions. You learned by feel, by the look of the dough, by how it pulled from the bowl. The preserves came from fruit grown close by or given as a gift. Both skills, the biscuit and the put-up fruit, began leaving kitchens in the 1980s as convenience baking and store-bought jam made the from-scratch versions feel unnecessary. They were not unnecessary. Continuing the trend of mini-sized food, on this list breaded tenderloin sliders were these tiny bite-sized pork sandwiches that you could have at events or parties. Tenderloin sandwiches already did so well in Indiana, and it was an adored 2 p.m. lunch for young adults. In terms of accessibility, this made an already loved sandwich much easier to eat. Number 14, molasses on biscuits. A biscuit split in half, a pour of sorghum molasses into the open face of the bread, folded and eaten over the sink because it dripped. In the southern mountains, sorghum was sometimes called the poor people's sweetener, and that was accurate. A family in Harlan County, Kentucky could produce their own sorghum from a small plot of cane, and a quart jar of thick, dark syrup was worth more than most store-bought sweets. The molasses soaked into the soft biscuit quickly and had to be eaten fast before it ran. If you grew up in those mountains, you ate these before school and again when you came home in the afternoon. The biscuit cost almost nothing if a family used their own flour and lard. The sorghum was often bartered, grown locally, or carried from the general store for about 15 cents a quart in 1963. That was your whole season of cold afternoons. Wonder Bread pinwheels required a rolling pin, a refrigerator, and patience, which is why they felt like an achievement when you got them right. You pressed the rolling pin across a fresh slice until it was almost paper thin, spread it to the edges with cream cheese or thin sliced ham, rolled it tight from one end, and refrigerated it for 20 minutes. Then out, sliced on a diagonal, each round holding its shape. Wonder Bread, introduced by the Taggart Baking Company of Indianapolis in 1921, was specifically engineered soft enough to compress without tearing. The softness critics mocked was the entire structural point. Whole wheat wouldn't roll. Sourdough shattered. The pinwheel was one of the few things a child in the 1980s could make from scratch that looked like party food. The technique required actual skill, feel for the right pressure, the right amount of filling, and once kitchens moved on, no one thought to teach it again. Arizona would eventually borrow from Tex-Mex cuisine when chimichanga started becoming a regular sight at almost any Latin American restaurant. Fusion joints or roadside stalls, everyone would be selling some kind of chimichanga, which is a deep-fried burrito. Filled with green veggies and sauces, 6 out of 10 people in the street would pick one up on their way to work in the 70s. Number 15. Dandelion greens with vinegar and bacon grease. In April and May, the front yards of rural families across Appalachia became a free food source. The young dandelion greens, picked before they flowered, the older ones turned too bitter, got washed and dressed in a skillet with hot bacon grease and a splash of apple cider vinegar, sometimes with a little sugar to balance the acid. In 1937, the USDA published a bulletin recommending dandelion greens for low-income households, calling them among the most nutrient-rich wild plants available. Your grandmothers had understood this for generations before any government publication said so. A woman in Mingo County, West Virginia, described going out to pick greens with her mother in the 1940s and continuing the tradition into the 1960s, not because times were hard, but because that was what spring tasted like, free and in season and better than most things your family could have bought. Cinnamon toast made under the broiler is not the same as cinnamon toast from a toaster. And if you grew up in a kitchen where someone made it right, you already know that. You laid the bread on the oven rack, spread butter heavy enough to pool in the center, covered it with white sugar, and shook cinnamon over until the color looked right. 30 seconds under the broiler was the difference between a crackling amber crust and a scorched disaster. You watched through the glass. When the sugar bubbled and darkened at the edges, you pulled it out. The broiled method came from Depression-era kitchens where the oven was already on, and it made its way through the decades as the version your mother made when you came home sick from school. The toaster version tastes like seasoned bread. The broiled version tastes like caramelized sugar, a slight char at the crust, butter soaked into every pore. The instinct to use the broiler this way has nearly vanished from American cooking. Another one for the mini munchie sublist on our top 20 so far is cherry hand pies, which Michigan locals just could not get enough of. Beautifully soft, portable, and filled with tart inside. These made for the perfect baked goodie to show off to your friends or enjoy on your own. People had different takes on the dish, which goes to show how frequently it was made in homes back then. Number 25. Water gravy on crackers. When there was nothing left to spread and nothing to dip, there was still the skillet. Your grandmother scraped the drippings from the bottom of the cast iron pan, bacon grease, lard, the brown bits from whatever had fried there last, and built a thin gravy from flour, water, and those drippings. She poured it hot over saltines or soda crackers. In the coal camps of McDowell County, West Virginia, this appeared at the end of the week when the company's store credit ran out. Families called it gravy crackers or just something warm. The crackers went soft under the gravy and soaked up every bit of that pan flavor. If you were that child, hungry since noon, soft, salty, warm crackers were more than enough. The whole thing came together in under 5 minutes from ingredients that cost almost nothing. But if saltine crackers were what you made alone on a slow Tuesday, Velveeta nachos were what happened when someone's older sister decided the whole afternoon needed to be an occasion. Velveeta had been in American kitchens since 1928, engineered by the Monroe Cheese Company to melt smoothly without breaking, a quality that real cheddar could never reliably deliver. By the early 1980s, as Tex-Mex flavor spread into the mainstream, Velveeta found its true calling. You laid tortilla chips across a plate, hacked the block into rough slabs over them, and slid the whole thing into the oven or the microwave. The microwave version came out with orange pooling and a slight skin on top that meant it was done. Real cheese splits, browns, and goes stringy. Velveeta stayed perfect and patient. You can still buy the block, but nobody makes it this way anymore. Chips spread across the plate, the block cut by hand, everyone crowded around before it cooled. For more in-the-box food that is not as out there as Rocky Oysters, let's have some Snickerdoodles. Coated with cinnamon and the type to crumble wonderfully in your mouth, these were really popular cookies in Connecticut. Platters of these for some weeknight baking would make for some very wonderful confectionaries in the 70s. Number 11. Kool-Aid powder eaten dry. Tear the corner off the packet. Pour a little of the colored powder into the palm. Lick it. This was not something any mother suggested. It was a child's invention, discovered when the water ran out or the weather was too cold to mix a pitcher or there was simply no patience for waiting. Children across the rural Midwest and the suburban South did this with Kool-Aid throughout the 1960s. A single packet cost a nickel. 5 cents for a full afternoon of tongue-staining, eye-watering, intensely sour and sweet powder eaten straight from the paper, mixed with a little sugar from the other palm if prepared. Eaten plain if not. Cherry was the most popular. Grape was the most intense. The whole ritual turned lips red or purple or green depending on the flavor. Not one adult in your life would have endorsed this snack. That was exactly why children loved it. It was entirely theirs. Peanut butter and banana on Wonder Bread was the everyday version of something Elvis Presley had made famous by frying. But in the 1980s, most kids ate it cold and unadorned, pressed flat before being cut into rectangles, never triangles. You spread the peanut butter thick enough to hold the banana slices in place, laid them in a single layer, and ate it standing at the counter before the bread had time to go soggy. The banana had to be ripe, but not soft. A soft banana turned the bread wet in minutes, and you learned that by ruining one. Presley's documented preference was for his version fried in butter with bacon and honey, a recipe associated with his childhood in Tupelo, Mississippi. The cold version your mother made after school had none of that richness. What it had was speed, and it was ready before you'd finished dropping your backpack on the floor. Another one that had a head start in its state and an established presence was Spam in Hawaii, so Spam musubi was a natural evolution. Japanese-American restaurants would typically go the extra mile with wrapping it all on a block of rice with nori. Most people would have grilled Spam on their own, but this bite-sized version which completes our trinity was easily the best. Number 24. Bread, butter, and sugar. White bread, a thin layer of butter, a sprinkle of white sugar pressed between the two halves. That was the whole recipe. If you grew up across rural Ohio, Indiana, and Missouri, grew up believing this was a real treat. The butter kept the sugar anchored. The bread went soft in the hand if held too long, and it had to be eaten fast or the sugar started shifting loose. In 1960, a loaf of white bread cost 20 cents. A 5-pound bag of sugar cost 38 cents. For a family of 5 with no snack money, that sugar sandwich cost less than a penny per child. Mothers didn't call it poverty food. Your mother called it a snack, and that was that. Decades later, grandmothers still make these for grandchildren without thinking much about where the tradition came from. Some things stay because they are simple and they work. Pizza toast on white bread was what every American kid made in the years before Bagel Bites, and it was better in every way that mattered. You spread contadina or Hunt's tomato paste, not pizza sauce, not marinara, but the concentrated paste from the small can, across a slice of white bread, covered it with shredded mozzarella, and slid it under the broiler. 4 minutes watching. The cheese went from white to spotted to pulling away at the corners, and when it browned at the edges while still soft in the center, it was ready. Bagel Bites launched in 1985, created by 2 brothers in Hallandale, Florida, and within a few years became the commercial standard for after-school pizza snacking. Before that, the pizza toast was what you made yourself, how much paste, how thick the cheese, whether to shake oregano from the jar above the stove. The homemade version didn't disappear because it was inferior. It disappeared because the commercial one required no watching. If you're from Colorado and a baseball fan, you might remember Rocky Mountain oysters, which are a lot more questionable than they sound. Essentially, these are the testicles of bulls, which have been skinned, coated in flour and batter, and deep fried. As an appetizer, they were common at baseball games in the state, but it was a relatively local favorite that did not see much love in other places even in the 70s. Number 17. Cinnamon toast in the oven. White bread, buttered, dusted with cinnamon and sugar, slipped under the broiler or set flat in a low oven until the edges turned brown and the sugar formed a thin, crackling crust. The smell that came out of that oven reached every room in the house and brought you running without being called. In the farmhouses of southern Missouri and the small towns of western Tennessee, this was the Saturday afternoon snack, the one that meant there were a few spare minutes and enough sugar left in the canister. A loaf of bread cost 20 cents in 1965. The cinnamon lasted months. The whole thing was done in under 10 minutes and required nothing that wasn't already in the house. What you remember from those days isn't the recipe. They remember the smell, the sound of that sugar crust breaking when they bit into it, the warmth in their hands on a cold afternoon, the crust and the smell. That was childhood. Eating cereal dry was not a snack you invented. It was something you discovered, usually by accident, when you opened the box intending to pour it and then just didn't bother with the milk. Lucky Charms, Cap'n Crunch, Cocoa Puffs, whatever was in the cabinet, eaten by the handful straight from the bowl. The marshmallows in Lucky Charms were better dry. Everyone who grew up in the 1980s knew this, and nobody said it out loud because it seemed too obvious to mention. You picked out the marshmallows first, ate them separately, then finished the grain pieces as a kind of bland dessert. Cap'n Crunch was the dangerous one. The squares cut the roof of your mouth if you let them sit too long on your tongue. You developed strategies. Nobody taught you. By the early 1990s, cereal companies had begun marketing certain varieties explicitly as dry snacks, which meant the private discovery had become a product strategy. Deep frying things and vegetables would not stop at just that, because in Arkansas, fried pickles were the new mood of the week in the 70s. Just plain dill pickles that would be battered. Then deep fried, you could get baskets of these in food streets or in family gatherings as a side dish. Kind of something that hit its peak back in those ages, but it was pretty delicious. Number 12. Sorghum syrup on bread. Plain white bread or a torn piece of cornbread, a pour of golden sorghum syrup, folded and eaten over the sink because it would drip. In the mountain counties of eastern Kentucky, sorghum was not simply a condiment. It was a form of economy and tradition, passed down across generations without anyone writing it down. Kentucky led the nation in sorghum production well into the 1960s. A quart jar of good sorghum cost 15 cents or less if traded with a neighbor. The syrup was lighter and less bitter than blackstrap molasses, with a warm, grassy sweetness that tasted like late summer. Spread thin on bread, it stretched through a long afternoon for almost no cost. If you grew up eating this, you remember its exact color, amber at the edges, darker toward the center of the jar, and the specific weight of the pour. Decades later, maybe you still keep a jar on the shelf, not because they need it, but because it means something to have it there. Cobbler had already been popular enough in Atlanta, so it would be natural that, like key lime, peach cobbler bites would become a thing too. Definitely popular in African American communities, as these were an affordable and easy way to have something nice at cookouts. Kids may not have particularly liked them, but adults in their 30s went head over heels for the bites. Number 9. Deviled egg on a cracker. A hard-boiled egg, halved, the yolk mixed with a spoonful of mustard and a little vinegar, a shake of paprika on top if there was any in the cabinet. Set on a saltine and carry it in one hand. In church basements from Georgia to Ohio, the deviled egg appeared at every covered dish dinner and potluck going back to the used-to days of the 1940s and beyond. At home during the week, it was a simple way to use an egg that needed to be eaten. A dozen eggs cost about 57 cents in 1960, and families with chickens paid nothing. A woman in Rabun County, Georgia, put deviled eggs on crackers for her children every Thursday, the day before she checked the hen house, which made it a weekly tradition. Nobody called it an hors d'oeuvre. It was just a deviled egg on a cracker, and it was genuinely better than most things that cost more. Boston Baked Beans candy, just like crab chips, specializes in being easy to consume and make in bulk. Originally starting out in Massachusetts as peanuts that were coated in candy, which gave them a sweet crunch, they got popular enough to get packaged variants. Grocery stores would be filled with two things: kids and frustrated parents trying to haggle with them for one packet less in the 70s. Every snack on this countdown came from a kitchen, not a package. Make one this weekend, try the cheese ball, the cocktail meatballs, or the sausage balls. If any of these sat on a table you remember, leave a comment and say which one brought you back. Share this with someone who grew up walking into a house where the card table was already set and the cheese ball was already on the counter. And if you want more of these, hit subscribe.